Hey, Mark, how you doing? Listen, JavaOne is back. You going?
As a matter of fact, I am. I am actually getting to present there again this year.
Excellent, excellent. That's why we're here. We're here to talk about your session at JavaOne, which is back in Las Vegas, October 17th through 20th. So what are you talking about?
I'm not sure. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm talking about debugging Spring Boot applications using, of course, Java.
Cool, cool. All right. So why is debugging important? I'm actually interested in this because I used to work in Solaris and I used to work on the test team, and so I'm interested in people who debug and find problems.
Well, for years I've looked at debugging as kind of the lost art, and I feel like we as developers we tend to rely on experience versus actual truth and finding that source of truth. So we shortcut a lot of things, and sometimes that even works. Sometimes it doesn't work at all, and we wind up wasting a lot of time. And we typically think of a lack of debugging skills as a junior developer type of problem, but it isn't, because again, as more experienced developers, many times we fall into the same pitfalls, maybe for different reasons. Again, I've seen this before. This is how to fix it. But so many times we try to short circuit it, try to shortcut things, and wind up making a much longer resolution time than we would necessarily have to, and much more frustrating too. So when you find the source of truth, you can fix the actual problem versus vigorously attacking symptoms. And that's what this talk is all about.
Interesting that you mentioned that this is not necessarily a problem for more junior developers. Why are senior developers sort of not, some senior developers anyway, why is this an issue for them?
Well, I think we all could do better.
Okay.
I'm a firm believer, and we're always learning, and we should always be learning. But I think, again, for different reasons, I think a lot of times when you're new to a technology or a tool chain, it's just a lack of awareness. But once you fall into a pattern and I've fixed this 3 times, this type of issue 3 times, I should say, hopefully not the same thing. But when you've been there a time or two, you tend to find things that fit patterns, which generally is a good thing. However, again, you can kind of fall into that trap, right? Because if it sort of approximates something that you've seen before, and there's a quick fix that maybe you spend a lot of time trying to find, you just typically apply that quick fix. I kind of think of like taking your car to a mechanic. So if you take your car to a mechanic and the mechanic says, "Oh, I've seen this, just fix this, just replace this, and that'll be $400," and you say, "Great, I'll be back on my way." And if that mechanic doesn't do adequate troubleshooting, they're just going based on a sort of approximation of something they've seen before, chances are that's not going to fix the problem, and you're going to be back tomorrow, and then another $400 or $800, and then you do that 3 or 4 times, and you think, gosh, if that person had just taken the time to accurately diagnose the issue, probably in half a day I would have had my car back, spent less, and been a much happier customer. And that's kind of what we fall into, even as more experienced developers. We fall into that trap all too often.
Interesting. Okay, so tell me about the actual session in terms of how you do it. I mean, I'm watching some of your videos. You do a lot of live coding. Is that going to be what it's about?
Yes. Now, I will say that in the context of Spring Boot applications, there is a lot of things that happen on your behalf. Largely, I kind of attribute most of them to auto configuration. Many times, if you're new to Spring, or even if you're not, you kind of view that as a little bit of dark art, so it isn't. I mean, it's all science and technology. This is just, it's not magical, it's logical. But many times it helps to peel back those covers and see, for instance, the application initialization, what happens in the dependency injection container. And I step into that, again, through the debugger. And then we actually write some code, and I try to keep it very simple code and straightforward so we can focus specifically on what we're trying to accomplish versus setting the table around it. But yes, it's 100% in the debugger and in actual in the IDE, in the browser, where we see what comes back, for instance, from Actuator, to get to the crux of the matter and what the problem could be and how to solve it.
Interesting. I mentioned a little bit earlier that I was actually interested in this topic because I used to work in Solaris. I used to work at Sun on the Open Solaris project, and I worked in the kernel team. Obviously, I'm not a kernel developer, but I was in that organization, surrounded by kernel developers, and these are obviously non-trivial people, right? So they're highly skilled, and I was always very interested in their training in terms of their thinking process of how they wrote code, how they tested code, how they did code reviews, things like that. Just as almost as a training for me on how to manage a project, right? Because, when you're dealing with such highly scalable and very, very important systems, just like you do in, Java, these things have to work. They have to work well. And I was interested in their thinking process, particularly, designing the system, you say debugging, and so fixing problems, before it's out there, essentially. In your experience, is there, talk to me a little bit about the difference between writing code and then, debugging, right? What's the difference in the thought process?
Well, the simple answer, I suppose, is one's a creative discipline and one's a very, very much analytical discipline. But there is a lot of overlap and a lot of play. We'd hopefully, again, and I kind of hone in on this specifically, but obviously, hopefully, we're doing test-driven development. We're actually creating the tests first to catch a lot of things that might potentially crop up. We're not just throwing code out there and going, gee, I hope it works. However, so I am ignoring a lot just for the topic because we only get a short time together to discuss this, and then, of course, much more time afterward. But I do think it's in... The two disciplines are not orthogonal. I mean, you have the creative discipline, which is wonderful. I always talk about development, not just that it's a very mathematically based type of process. It's an artistic process as well. The two are not mutually exclusive, and in fact, they complement. But I do think that it's easy to kind of fall more on one side or the other if we don't maintain that balance. And once you create some code, even if all the tests pass, many times something happens, which I always do come back to so many times. And again, I'm guilty of it too. If you call over you used to be when you'd sit next to people. Now, of course, we're a little more geographically dispersed. Thank goodness. I think that makes us a lot more efficient and effective in many ways. But if you call over someone via Teams or Slack or what have you, and you say, just kind of sanity check me, look over what I'm doing. And of course, then you step through things and you start talking through things. A lot of times what happens is the other person, or you, if you're the person called over, you say, well, what's it doing? Well, it's doing this. Well, how do you know it's doing that? Well, because I'm getting no value back. Okay. So how do you know it's doing what you say you're doing? Well, because I'm getting no value back. Yeah, but aren't there more than one plausible scenarios that would result in you getting no value back here? Well, no, I don't think so. You don't think so. And until you isolate exactly what's happening and why it's happening, you really don't know. You just suspect. And again, sometimes we kind of have a strong suspicion and that turns out to be right. And most of the time that's good, but that can actually hurt us down the road because if we get lucky, shouldn't say get lucky, but if we happen upon the solution 3 or 4 times in a row, we just assume that that's always the case. And the world has a funny way of showing you things are not 100%, almost inevitably. Right. It's going to show you that edge case at some point, and you're going to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find what the truth really is because it all of a sudden doesn't match the other 4 or 5 times that happened almost identically before that. Something is changed. Something has changed. There's a variable that's different. Not literally a variable, but perhaps it is. And that's what we have to combat. Combat the assumptions, find the verifiable truths, and find the solution to the actual problem underneath.
It's very interesting. I mean, you use the word truth multiple times here.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. You don't know until you actually see the data and you actually go through the whole thought process. It's just basically a scientific method. I mean,
yes, really. and I also talk about the what and the why. Well, first of all, many times we short circuit this and we think we know what is happening, but when we find out what's happening, it's something different. The what is different. But even once we determine the what, many times, again, there can be multiple ways of getting that result. I'm getting back a value of 4. Why am I getting a 4? Well, I'm pretty sure I know that. Well, then we're into a new set of assumptions. We have to verify why we're getting 4 here versus we're pretty sure we know why we're getting a value of 4 back here.
So is this something you've been interested in for a long time?
Yes. That's something that I I had a good mentor years ago who really pounded into me the importance of debugging, good debugging skills, and sadly, like most things that we do when we get involved with something, we get busy with other things, and it just never happens. And I'd thought for years about doing a talk on debugging. This is kind of the intro talk. Actually am putting together a much deeper dive, but this is kind of the let's get started and start the conversation talk. Because I'm just now getting around to this. It had been on my list for some time, and I'm finally kind of throwing it out there. So I'd like to take this much deeper and broader, actually, in terms of ground that we cover. But I think this is a good start to kind of get people thinking along these lines about, I'll say slow down. That doesn't mean take 3 days to try to troubleshoot an issue that you can maybe get a couple hour fix in. But many times we think, oh, this will be a quick fix, and it almost never is a quick fix.
Right.
So if rather than try to throw something out and miss, and then do that 3 or 10 or 50 times, if we just take a beat and we really analyze what's actually happening and why it's happening, we, relatively speaking, the fix is much faster, even though we tend to slow down, take a breath, and then fix it right.
Interesting. Well, I'm sure it's going to be a great talk. I'm really interested in it myself, just for project management experience, basically, because I observe developers and the way they work, and I glean anything I can, any kind of lessons I can for for what I do. I'm interested just to speak a little bit more broadly here about your experience. Why did you become a developer?
Boy, it's probably one of the worst reasons in the world. Well, I know I actually have heard worse, so I won't say that. But I, when you're first starting out in this field, many times we look at computers as being precise, right? It either works or doesn't. It's on or off. Even binary. You've got your 1 and 0, right? It's literally two values. So at the very core of it, it either is something or isn't something. It either, like I said, is on or off. So I felt like, there are so many, disciplines, career options, whatever, where the people make things kind of messy. And I always kind of initially, when I was much younger and much more, naive, thought the computers would isolate and eliminate much of that. Little did I know that dealing with people is a larger portion of it. I often say that anytime we try to find a solution to a problem, the tech, even though not to minimize the difficulty of the tech and the complexity, but the tech is the simple part, right? It's getting all of the stakeholders on board, getting everybody to agree that this is a valid user requirement and we have the capability to implement it. Does it make sense? And can we scale it? And so many things. And technically, yes, those are challenges, but the people challenges are much larger. So ironically, one of the main reason I got into tech is absolutely a flawed reason at all. But that said, I do enjoy the people part of it. I think that is what makes it certainly more dynamic. And then you still have like the debugging underneath. You still have that very precise analysis that you can apply as well. So it's in my mind now, it's kind of the best of all worlds. Certainly a different perspective than what I came into it with.
Interesting. Okay, so if you had to do it all over again, would you do it? In other words, you became a developer, years ago, but now, we're now. At least, it's a different world now, different technology, different tools. The tools that you guys use are incredible. I used to be in the construction business, so I know a lot about tools. Essentially, excavating equipment and hammers, nails. These are all tools, and they can get very sophisticated. And one of the things that has really struck me is the sophistication of the tools. A single developer can do an enormous amount of work now versus, years ago. So would you do it all over again?
Yeah, anytime I think about this, I always think of the Einstein quote, if I had it to do it over again, I would have been a locksmith or something like that. Yes, the short answer is yes, I would. And you touch on something it's kind of a paradox, right? Because a single developer can do so much more now, and yet we do much more as a team sport, if you will, than perhaps we ever have in our past. So again, I guess that could be good or bad depending on your perspective, but generally speaking, we have better tools than we have ever had. We have, I always feel a little guilty saying this, but it's like we have a much bigger candy shop
Yeah.
or a much bigger toy box or toolbox or whatever analogy you want to use. But we have so many more things at our disposal, much more affordable, reasonable, reachable, shareable, and we have a much greater potential for impacting the world in some positive way. I guess, the downside is perhaps a negative way as well, but we have the opportunity to contribute and give and do with far more reach than we ever have in the past. I can't see that changing other than continuing to increase either. So, I one of the things I always say about this field is that you need to constantly be learning, because every day there are so many more things that become available: tools, languages, changes to languages, so many more things that you want or need to learn. And even if we are continually learning, we're falling behind every day.
Right.
So that can either be exhilarating or frustrating, depending on what your perspective is. I choose exhilaration because I love to learn, and I think many of us get into this field because we do. It's like that ever expanding candy store. You just can't get bored because there's so many things out there to try and to apply, which leads to problems like we try to apply every solution possible that comes down the pike to every problem, and it doesn't always fit. But certainly we're getting better and better candies or toys or whatever that we can apply to certain circumstances and find that fit, which, we're in the best possible position we've ever been in, and it's only getting better. So I would encourage everybody to keep learning, keep growing, keep enjoying the process. Always think of yourself as the village idiot, because there's so much more to learn, and that's a good thing. We're just hopefully getting smarter as we go.
Yeah, it's interesting because, when you go to JavaOne now, really any Java conference, if you've been around a long time like you and I have, you see a lot of the older people, but really most of the people there are young, And I was talking to Bruno last night. We were talking about our first experiences at JavaOne. For me, it was in 2000 at Sun. He was talking about his, but all these new people now coming in, they have their own histories, their own experiences that they are contributing to the larger, Java community. So JavaOne is being reborn here. It's coming back in October. And so how many JavaOnes have you been to in the past?
I've never actually stopped and counted them.
More than one?
Yeah, more than one. I'm thinking around a dozen, or not quite a dozen, maybe. I need to go back and do that. Now that you mentioned that, I just never have stopped and thought about that. I didn't come in early JavaOne. I came in much later. That's a whole other story, a whole topic for another podcast. But some of my best and earliest memories, interestingly enough, are of Bruno. With the Be Our Java Man with the flag,
right.
So many good things. But I've been through several iterations of JavaOne. With Moscone and hotels and Moscone and Vegas now. And and it's just, it's always different, right? So, I know as developers and in technology, we love change, but we hate change because we're still humans and all of that. But there's always something new that you can find and grab onto. Sure, you miss XYZ because you have great memories of that, but the new stuff is cool too. So you find that new nugget that you haven't perhaps experienced before because it's never been there before. And it's always something cool. It's always something new.
Yeah. It's really great. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know about Vegas. I haven't been to Vegas in probably 25 years. I can't imagine it's changed very much, but we'll see when I get there. So,
I went to a conference there a few years ago, and Vegas, like every city, it has its pros and the cons. But I will say this: Vegas is just, I don't think there's a city that's more ideally suited for having conferences and conventions. I just think it's just brilliantly laid out for that. There's so many things that you can do outside, I guess, but realistically, I guess from the other side, if you never want to go outside of the conference experience, you really don't have to. You can immerse yourself completely. So it's all in what you want. And again, like in San Francisco, I would always find different restaurants, new restaurants, and try them in different things that maybe I wasn't even aware of for a number of years before, or just hadn't had the chance to swing over and eat there or something. But with Vegas, there are all kinds of new and different experiences you can try. But if you really one of the great things, I'm diverting a little here, but one of the great things about JavaOne historically has been that you can just sit down and hack on some things with some friends and work through things. And, if you lose a whole afternoon just immersed in your code and talking to your friends who are working through maybe a thorny issue, or maybe just kind of hey, I wonder what would happen if I tried this, you can do that. You don't have to go outside of that environment, and it's right there. So, right. I'm kind of jazzed about it. I hope it goes well. We'll see. We'll give it our best shot. I think it's going to be pretty awesome, but a lot of it is what we make of it. So let's
exactly.
Let's do this.
Exactly. It'll be great. Okay. Well, Mark, looking forward to your session, and we will see you in, goodness gracious, just a couple of months now in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I will have links to all your bio and all your social and everything in the show notes, and people can register for JavaOne as well. It's coming up soon, and we'll see you there.
See you.